Hey, I'm Patrick Kelly, and you're watching Pat to the Future, my brand new series where I'm going to be diving into everything exciting and new that's happening in the technology space. I'm going to talk about AI, software, no code, everything that is relevant to the modern business, an employee, or even just someone who's interested in technology. So, in this very first episode, what I want to do is I want to start with the basics. I want to start with generative AI, and I want to talk about some actionable ways that you can use it in your business and the types of output that you're generally going to be looking for, as well as how to get better quality results. So the first thing within that category is just talking about the types of output. Now, most people will be looking for output in one of four ways. Plain text, which is just what it sounds like. Maybe it's a few sentences, no particular structure, nothing fancy going on. Maybe it's a really brief summary of something or some kind of, one sentence answer. Now, structured text is something that's a little different. This would be still text, but in the form of probably Markdown, which is a language that represents things like bolded headers and lists and basic structures. This is used a lot in blogs and platforms that need to show text in some kind of basic structured way. It's not really code, and it's not something that you really have to worry about too much. But if you're generating something like a blog post or a business plan summary, anything like that, there's going to need to be some structure to it. And so for the LLM or AI model to output some structure, it's going to need to be beyond just plain text. And so I think that's probably the most common need these days for the average business is some kind of structured text. Depending on your needs, you might need images or video. I don't think most of the video models are really publicly accessible yet, so I'll definitely touch back on that, hopefully within the next few months when these become more available. And then finally, of course, there's outputting code and structured objects that would be used in some kind of software or an API. But that's not the topic of this video because I don't think that's the average need. So in this case, we're talking about structured text and how to get better quality, which means usually more consistent outputs. Now, I have 5 things that I want to talk about that can increase the quality of the outputs. Number 1 is breaking down the process into multiple steps. It sounds pretty simple, and it's not that complicated to do. Even if you're just doing it manually in the OpenAI interface, I've found that the process of breaking something down or sort of chunking it into logical steps that can build on top of each other is the best way to get a good output. And so let me just explain an example. Imagine you are writing a blog post. So to start, the very first step is you ask the AI to generate an outline. Maybe it's 10 bullet points that summarize the core topics or headlines that you want to cover in the blog post. Now, if you do that, you can look at that level and you can make sure that at that point, it's very much what you're looking for. And if you paste that into some kind of plain text editor or text edit program, you can modify it and make sure that it's exactly what you want. You could, of course, if you're in a LLM interface like ChatGPT, you could try to explain what you want to change, but I think better than trying to explain and edit is just to make a revision at this earliest stage so that you can modify those points, make sure that it's exactly what you want. Then when you're ready, you can paste in the revised version and say, great, here's the revised version, let's build on top of this. And you can pretty much take that pattern and keep going with it as long as you need to. Of course, it's a little bit tedious if you're dealing with large amounts of text. In the case of a blog, once you're actually getting to proper paragraphs and stuff like that, then there is going to be some manual revision and editing. I don't really think there's much you can do to get around that while still having some control over the output. And so that brings me to my point number 2, which is human confirmation. I think kind of goes hand in hand with the multiple steps, but I think a very critical thing that isn't really being expected at this point. I think a lot of people think AI is this silver bullet that's just going to generate this amazing output on the first go. I don't think that's really the case. And I think the problem is that we're just expecting AI to know exactly what we wanted. It doesn't matter if it's even good or bad, or if there's even a way to qualitatively measure that. It's more about whether it's aligned with what we want. And so, of course, better prompting, more training data, those kinds of things, that can really help. But if you can find a way to build human confirmation into your process at as many steps as are reasonable, then you just know you're going to get a better result. You're essentially becoming a curator of the AI's work. So you can have the AI doing 90% of the work, but then your 10% of curation efforts are going to make it multiple times better and much more aligned with your business or your goals, whatever you're trying to do. So those two are really easy to do, and you can do them manually, so that's great. No software required. Now, here's one that's a little more complicated. Technically, you can still do it without extra software, but it's the idea of using multiple AI models and using multiple models at the same time, even if you just opened it in different tabs, asking the exact same question, getting that output, and then finding a way to essentially create a finalized output, which is a summary. At the end of the day, you're going to need to choose one of the models to be this sort of master model that gets both generated versions and outputs the final version. But the idea is you basically say, hey, OpenAI, do this. And then you say, hey, Claude, do this. And then you take both those responses, you feed them both into one of them, maybe even in a separate conversation, or maybe you follow up to one, and you say, here are two versions of this, take these into account and generate one final version. There's no guarantee that it's going to produce a better result necessarily, and it's kind of hard to measure, but it's something that you can try if you feel like having different model perspectives might help your output. So number 4 is providing training data. This is critical if you're doing anything where you want the structure to be consistent. So even if you're generating a blog post or a business plan or a resume or something like that, you need to be able to feed in data that is, real, properly formatted, correct data, which can be difficult. You just have to be careful because you don't want to feed in any bad data. So I would say, for most cases, even 2 or 3 good examples will really, really help lead the AI in the direction that you're looking for. I've tried this so many times. A prompt with no training data versus a prompt with even one example is a huge difference. So there are cases where, again, you can do this in the interface. We're starting to get into the realm of where software can help you a bit more because it becomes a bit tedious to be trying to manage this all the time, especially if you're trying to create some sort of recurring system for consistently generating things. So we'll talk about those tools in another video, but structured or unstructured training data can make a huge difference. And then the last, number 5, the last point is structured output. So this is something that can only be done through the API or through a tool where you're not just having the AI model generate some blob of output. You're actually specifically having it output certain fields in a specific structure with certain types. It knows the exact field names and it knows what they're for. There's descriptions of the fields, and all of this gives the AI the ability to bring significantly better results and very, very consistent. So that's all we'll talk about in this video, but please subscribe if you're interested in learning more, as I'm going to be covering tools, I'm going to be doing interviews, and I'm going to be talking about lots of different exciting things in the technology space. Thanks for watching.